Hello everybody, it's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for my November reading wrap up. So before I dive into all of the books that I read in the month of November, I just wanted to show you my new shirt that I am wearing right now, but the angle that the camera's at, you can't really see. So I will insert a little bit of footage of me standing up and filming it for you. As you can see, it is the Buffy characters drawn in the style of Peanuts characters. I absolutely love it. As you may be aware, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and I really wanted to get a t-shirt that has some of the characters on there. I've wanted to do that for a while, but nothing's really caught my eye. But now, finally, something has. I just think this is so cute and I'm really happy to have it. Anyway, let's talk about the books that I read in the month of November. So, some of you may already be aware, but myself, along with Ren from the Reading Rain, Steph from Novelty Corner, and Meredith from Reading with Merv, ran the Australian readathon throughout the month of November. The idea behind this readathon is to read books by Australian authors. There was a bingo board, which I will put on the screen, and you could choose to read books that correspond to all of the different places on the bingo board if you wanted to, or you could just read a book by an Australian author and that would count towards having participated in the readathon. We wanted something really chill, really relaxed, that would just encourage people to read some Australian authors, because all of us Australian booktubers happen to think that there are some amazing Australian authors and incredible Australian books out there. We also had a group book, which was The Boy from the Mish by Gary Lonesborough. It did meet a number of different prompts on the bingo board. So if you'd only read that book, not only would you have read the group book and had a chat with us, but you would have met quite a few of the prompts on the bingo board. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. So anyway, I'm going to talk you through the books that I read in the month of November, and I'll let you know which prompts they corresponded to. When I did my TBR, I selected books to meet each of the individual prompts, but I knew when I was doing that I was highly unlikely to read all of those books and that some of them would just have to double up for the prompts, which was perfectly okay. I will link my announcement video down below if you are interested at all and you just didn't happen to know about it, because we will be doing it again sometime in 2024. We haven't yet decided. I don't know if it'll be November again. We're thinking of changing it to a different month just because it gets very busy around this time of year. But anyway, we'll see how we go and we will let you know. So I'm going to just talk you through the books that I read in the order that I put them in my journal, which is how I always do things. However, I am going to let you know what books corresponded to what prompts as I go through. The other thing to note, if you're new here and you don't know this already, my stats come up in a different video. I am thinking of changing things for next year, but I'll talk about that when I talk through next year's goals. But yeah, if you're looking for stats, they come up in a different video, so stay tuned if you're interested in that. Anyway, all of that housekeeping aside, I'm going to have a sip of tea and then we'll talk about the books. The first book I read in November was House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. This met the host's favourite prompt. It was one of Ren's favourite books. It was quite short, so it didn't take me very long to read. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 7.86 on CawPile, which translates to 4 stars. And yeah, I thought it was absolutely fantastic, really well written, creepy, and just a lot of fun. So in this book, we are following the perspective of Iris Hollow, who is the youngest Hollow sister. And we start the book when her elder sister, Grey, has gone missing. It's bringing back a lot of memories about when the girls, there are 3 sisters, there is Grey, Vivi and Iris, when they went missing for 6 months when they were, I think, Grey was 11 and Iris was 6. They were on holidays in Edinburgh and their family was walking through Edinburgh. I think it was New Year's Eve, and the girls just disappeared. One minute they were there, the next minute they were gone. They disappeared for 6 months and they turned up back again 6 months later. However, they weren't quite the same and they were never able to say where they'd been or what had happened to them. So when I say they weren't quite the same, they were very similar to how they had been, but some things had changed about the way they looked. They now had white blonde hair where before they hadn't. I think their eyes changed colour and they were just generally kind of a little bit weird and a little bit creepy. That's what happened in the past. 10 years later, and we're following Iris, like I said, and Iris is trying to figure out what has happened to Grey, and it is looking rather similar to what happened to them when they were children, and it causes Iris and Vivi to go on a little bit of an adventure to try and figure out what on earth happened to them back then and what happened to Grey now. It is creepy, it is paranormal, and otherworldly and ethereal, and I just thought it was fantastic. I thought it was very well written. I love the way Crystal Sutherland described the world and described the various different things from the other world and how things might have been occurring and why. I thought that was really well done. Like I said, her descriptions were fantastic. There was a lot of kind of not quite body horror, but kind of body horror and kind of plant creepy horror type descriptions in here, which I actually really enjoyed. I, as you know, if you've been around for a while, have been trying to develop my horror reading a little bit, and I feel like I enjoyed this more having read it now rather than I would have done even 6 months ago when I had less experience in the horror genre. But yeah, I just thought it was fantastic. I thought it was super creepy, gothic, mysterious, and it kept me on my toes the whole way through reading the book. I really wanted to know what was going on. The reveal at the end was done really, really well, and I kind of thought what it turns out to be had happened was going to be happened, but at the same time, what would have happened. But at the same time, I was hoping it wouldn't. So she did really well on that. The only real things that kept this from being a 5 stars for me, basically some issues I had with the way that beauty was discussed in this book. So first of all, the girls are described as being completely otherworldly, ethereally beautiful. They are skinny, they have long white blonde hair, they're very pale, they're very kind of ethereal pixie girl, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, but given that that is a very prevailing notion within our society that you need to be skinny and ethereal and blonde and so on in order to be considered beautiful, I was a little bit concerned about that, especially given that this is a young adult fiction, so it is aimed at teenagers. I'd say probably mid to late teenage, early 20s, and I just feel like that is the time when you are most likely to have body image issues and to be really influenced by media and by what is put forward as being beauty. And yeah, it just worried me a little bit just in terms of what people might be taking from that. But having said that, I really enjoyed her writing. I really thought that it was well done. It didn't dwell on that a huge amount, so although it's a little bit concerning and just a little bit annoying that that's kind of like, of course it's skinny white people, they were otherworldly beautiful. And something that's actually touched upon in the book is this idea that in nature, extremes are a bad sign. So something that is extremely beautiful or something that is extremely ugly, either of those things are an indication of danger. So there was this overall feeling of, yes, these girls are beautiful, but they're also dangerous, and there's also something creepy and disturbing about them, or about what happened to them, and about how they just looked quite average European, average British, until they disappeared and came back, and that's when they had that otherworldly look. So I don't think it's necessarily, I said I was concerned, I don't think it's necessarily that concerning, because I feel like that was touched on in the book as well, but just because it comes with all this other beauty myth, that it'll be worrying. But at the same time, it was quite nuanced and there was a lot going on, and I do think that hopefully people who are reading this would pick up on some of that nuance. But anyway, that was the first book that I read in the month of November, House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. Next up, I read The Foretelling of Georgie Spider by Amberlynn Quay Molina. This is the third and final book in the Tribe trilogy. The first book is The Interrogation of a Charlotte Wolf. I don't want to give too much information about this book in particular because, like I said, it's the third and final book, so I don't want to give out too many spoilers by talking about this book in general, but I'll talk about the world. So it is a dystopian. It is set in a future world. It is unclear what part of the world it's meant to be very similar to our world, but it's unclear whereabouts, although from the description you get the impression that it is set in Australia. Amberlynn Quay Molina is an Indigenous Australian author, and yeah, like I said, you get the impression that it is set in the outback of Australia. In this world, we are following a group of people called the Tribe, and we're following 3 different characters in 3 different books that are the kind of founders of the Tribe. The Tribe are a group of young people, so people in their teens all the way through their teens up to their early 20s, who are gifted. So gifted in this universe is meaning that they have some kind of extraordinary supernatural power. Georgie Spider can foretell, can see the future. Ashala Wolf has dream powers, and yeah, they all have different powers and different abilities. This started many years ago, and people were quite upset and worried and concerned about these different powers, about the fact that they were supernatural and people didn't know exactly what people with those powers could do. A group of people got together and created the civilian accords. These are accords which basically control people with power and basically make it so that you are not allowed to use your powers if you are a person who has these supernatural or extraordinary powers, and if you do, then you are put into detention centres, with the exception of some people who have powers that can be used for law enforcement and that sort of thing. The Tribe are a group of young people who have broken away from society, broken away from the cities, and have formed this society of outcasts in the kind of outback of Australia, and it's about them trying to change the world, change the way that people with their abilities are seen, trying to get justice. So that's kind of generally what the world is about. Like I said, I'm not going into detail about this one. I really enjoyed this one. I thought that it wrapped up the series as a whole really well. I read each of the books quite far apart. I feel like potentially I would like to reread them a bit closer together, just to get an idea of how they kind of flow on from each other and how it works when you read one after the other a little bit more rather than every couple of years. But yeah, I really enjoyed this series. I thought that it was really interesting, really clever. I think Amberlynn Quay Molina is a really fantastic author. She is really great world building, and you really get a sense that you're in the heads of these young people with abilities. I love the twists and turns in this series. So the second book, The Disappearance of Ember Crow, there was a bunch of things that were revealed about what was going on in the world and how things got set up that took it in a totally different direction from what I was expecting, and I really enjoyed that. It was a bit of a surprise, which was really cool. And then this wrapped up how those things impacted what else was going on, and yeah, I thought it was really well done. I thought it was really well written and just really fun young adult dystopian series. On Corpile, I gave this one a 7.43, which is also 4 stars. Sorry, I forgot to say what this worked for. So this one filled the prompt for Indigenous author and also young adult or middle grade, so yeah. The next book that I read is The Boy from the Mish by Gary Lonesborough. This was our group book, and like I said, it fulfilled quite a few prompts, so you could have read this one and fulfilled pretty much almost the entire bingo board. I think I ended up counting this towards orange on the cover. So Gary Lounsborough is an Australian Indigenous author, and the book is a contemporary young adult fiction. It is about a teenage boy, he's about 16 or 17 I believe, called Jackson, who lives on an Indigenous mission in country New South Wales. He is kind of just living a regular, ordinary life on the mission. He has a girlfriend, he has a bunch of really good friends, he just is kind of hanging out, drinking occasionally, living, you know, a teenage life in Australia. It is set over Christmas, and his aunt comes every Christmas to stay with them. She's from Sydney. She brings all of her kids, and she also brings, this time around, she also brings a teenage boy who's around Jackson's age called Thomas. Thomas has been in juvenile detention. I can't remember what crime he committed to get himself in detention, but anyway, he is out of detention now and has been sent as a foster child to live with Pam. So Pam brings him, and Thomas and Jackson are made to share a room. Jackson is kind of fascinated by Thomas, but he doesn't really know why. He keeps noticing what Thomas looks like and kind of being hyper aware of him, but he doesn't really understand what's actually going on. But as the boys start to communicate and get to know each other, they start to realize that they have feelings for each other, but they end up getting together, and then they have to navigate how to tell people, should they tell people. There is a lot of homophobia within the mission and within Indigenous society in Australia as it's painted in this book in general. It's a real struggle for the boys as to how to kind of deal with that and whether or not they should come out, who they should come out to, should it be a general thing, are they even in a relationship, what does all that mean? I thought this was incredibly well written. I gave this one a 9 on Corpile, which is 5 stars. I loved the characterization of these boys, particularly Jackson. It is from Jackson's perspective. I just thought that they were really well drawn characters. I really loved all of the characters. I thought they were all really well drawn, really well written. You really got a sense of each individual character. Even the smaller characters had their own personalities and their own hopes and dreams, etc., which I thought was really amazing. I think that it's a really important conversation to have, both from the perspective of not being an Indigenous Australian and learning more about what it's like to be an Indigenous Australian and the way that living on a mission impacts your life, the way the police see people who live on a mission, Indigenous people who live on a mission, and the interaction between the town. It was over tourist season, so there was a lot of white people and non-Indigenous people camping in the area, and the way that that interaction took place and the various different ways that the Indigenous people were treated by the incoming tourists and also the police in particular, but the white people in general in their town. I thought that was really, really important. I'm sure were I an Indigenous person, that would have spoken volumes to me. I'm sure that would have been really, really meaningful to have been able to see a certain part of your experience represented on page. But also, I think, and I'm obviously not really able to talk about this, I'm not Indigenous, I'm not queer, so I don't know, but it felt like it would be really meaningful for an Indigenous queer person to, again, see their experience mirrored, to hopefully give them some hope, because the resolution and the way that Jackson and Thomas are treated in the end is really fantastic, and just to give them that hope. So yeah, I thought it was a fantastic book. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said, I gave it 5 stars. It seemed to be generally loved by everyone reading the book as well, so that's really, really exciting. Moving on to the next book that I read, which was Force of Nature by Jane Harper. This is the second book in the Aaron Folks series. The first book was The Dry. The setup for this series is that we are following Aaron Folks. Aaron is a detective for the federal police in financial crimes, but each of the books that we follow Aaron and the investigations that we actually follow are either missing people or murder investigations. So each of the books are kind of about Folks kind of inadvertently finding himself in the middle of these investigations that are not his area, but because he's generally considered a really great investigator, he is embroiled for various reasons. So in the first one, he's embroiled because it's in his hometown, it's about people that he knows. In this second one, it is about a woman it's about a bunch of people who go on a corporate camping weekend away. And there's two groups. There's a group of men and a group of women. They both go out, they set out from the same spot, and they both head off into the mountains in Victoria. It's during winter, so it gets quite cold, and they are essentially given a map, given a compass, told to be at a certain place in a few days, and just sent off on their own. The women get completely lost and turned around, and they find themselves in a cabin in the middle of the woods that no one even knew was there. When they're supposed to come back, when they're supposed to be found, they aren't found, but they do eventually come back many hours late, and one of them is missing. So it is about that. I love Jane Harper's writing. I think that she writes fantastic characters and really writes fantastic crime novels. I absolutely love The Dry. I thought it was fantastic. I did like Force of Nature. It wasn't quite as good as The Dry, I didn't think. It felt a little bit more, what's the word? It felt a little bit, I guess, less exciting. It felt a little bit more formulaic. The setup of Aaron not being part of the investigation is kind of interesting. But yeah, it felt quite kind of generic, I guess. I mean, it was still good writing because it's Jane Harper and she's still a really good author, but it wasn't as fun or as interesting as I would have thought that it would have been, given that I absolutely love The Dry, and I'm pretty sure I gave it 5 stars. However, I did give it an 8 on Callpile, which is a 4.5 stars. So when I say it wasn't as good, I mean by like 0.5 of a star. So it was still fantastic. I still really enjoyed it. I just didn't love it as much, if that makes sense. However, I then followed Force of Nature with Exiles, also by Jane Harper. This is the 3rd and final book in the Dry series, or the Aaron Folks series. So again, we follow Aaron Folks as he is embroiled in a investigation about something that really doesn't affect him at all in his line of work. In this book, Aaron Folks has gone to South Australia to the christening of his great friend Reiko. Reiko is the police officer who works in Folks' hometown in the first book, in The Dry, and they come from South Australia, so they have their christening there, and Folks goes to the christening. It is happening a year later than it was originally meant to, and the reason for that is because the year before, when it was supposed to happen, someone who is related, connected to the family, disappeared and has not been found in that whole year. There was obviously an investigation into what happened. Her teenage daughter has never believed that all the explanations that have been given for what happened are what happened, and she has been trying to figure out what's going on and trying to keep the investigation alive and going the whole time. And Folks comes in a year later, and at this festival that was going on at the time and is going on again, there is an appeal to anyone that was there the year before who maybe knows something, and so it's all brought up again, and the investigation kind of restarts, not restarts, but kind of is given a new lease in life, I guess. And so Folks finds himself embroiled in this investigation. I gave this one an 8.43, which is also 4.5, although as you can see, a slightly higher rating in Callpile than Force of Nature. I really enjoyed this one as well. I, again, didn't love it as much as I loved The Dry. I'm pretty sure I gave The Dry 5 stars. I'm not 100% sure now. But I really, really enjoyed this one. I didn't find this one to be unoriginal or yeah, I didn't have the same problems with this one. I just found it really well written, really interesting. Again, I love Reiko, I love Reiko's characters, but I love Reiko's character, but I love Folks' character. I love all the characters in the book. I thought they were all really well written. There is some other stuff going on with Folks and a love interest and lots of other things happening behind the scenes in what happened to Kim, who is the woman that disappeared. I think that this one and The Dry I thought were better because there is more than just the investigation happening. So there's, in The Dry, you flick backwards and forwards to what happened with Aaron and some friends of his when he was a teenager. And in this one, you have a little bit. Eventually you get some of what happened with Kim, what was going on with her. There's a lot of family drama, family interconnectedness. There's also a bit of a love story for Folk. So there's more going on than just the investigation, whereas the middle one's kind of just the investigation, so it doesn't have quite the same interest, whereas this is just so many different things, but they're all tied together really, really well. I thought this was a fantastic ending to the trilogy. I really, really enjoyed it. Even though like I keep saying, Force of Nature isn't my favourite, I still would highly recommend the entire trilogy. I still gave it would work out probably as 4.5 stars, the whole trilogy. So I definitely highly recommend. I think Jane Harper is a fantastic writer. I think she writes crime really well. In this one, I did not figure out what was going on. Even when we started to kind of get the pieces come together, I still didn't know the end result of what had happened to Kim until the reveal, which was fantastic, and the reveal was done really, really well, and the resolution in general was just fantastic. So definitely enjoyed this one, highly recommend. The next book that I read was not really for the Australian readathon. It was Happiness for Beginners by Catherine Center. So I read this for my In Real Life Book Into Movie Club. We read the book and then watched the movie. I don't really have a lot to say about this book, to be honest with you. It was fine. I gave it 6.43 in Corpa, which is 3.5 stars. So pretty much middle of the road, slightly more interesting than your flat 3. But yeah, it was fine. It wasn't anything particularly amazing, didn't blow me away, but I enjoyed it. I'm glad I read it. Yeah, nothing really particularly exciting. The movie wasn't as good. The movie often isn't as good. Definitely prefer the book. The movie, I didn't think did it justice. I wouldn't necessarily recommend the movie unless you want to watch something that you can just kind of turn off and not really pay attention to, but I would recommend, if it's something you're interested in, that you read the book instead. So this is a story about a woman called Helen. Helen, I believe, is in her early 40s, and about a year before the book starts, she divorced from her partner. Helen has been trying to deal with what happened between herself and her partner and the divorce and everything for the last year. Her little brother suggests to her that she goes on this kind of hike adventure, which is really quite hardcore. There's a lot of information about people having died on some of these walks. You go out into, like, I don't know what it's in Australia we'd say the bush. I don't know what you say in America. It's set in America, but you go out into the kind of back country, and you're not supposed to take it. You're not supposed to take phones. You're not supposed to take all these things. It's just supposed to be about sort of survival and communing with yourself and nature and this sort of thing. Anyway, she decides that she wants to do this as a way to kind of figure out her next step and what's going to happen in her life. She goes to her brother's place the night before to get him to look after her dog. He's having a party and totally unequipped to look after the dog. She's talking to his roommate, who she's known for a long time, and the roommate asks for a lift the next day because it turns out the roommate's going as well. She's always found the roommate incredibly annoying. She's not happy with this, but she says yes anyway. And then some stuff happens, and then they decide to pretend they don't know each other throughout the trip. And it's really just about her kind of figuring herself out, making peace with what happened, coming to terms with what happened, and getting to know Jake, who's the brother's roommate, and getting to know a bit more about herself. Like I said, it was fine. I thought it was fun. I enjoyed reading it. I read most of it, or half of it at least, while I was getting my hair done. It was very easy to read, but it wasn't particularly amazing. So, if that sounds like a fun, easy read that you might enjoy, then I would recommend, but I wouldn't necessarily say, like, this will change your life, if that makes sense. Next up, we have The Accident by Katie McMahon. This is an Australian crime book as well. It's actually set here in Tasmania. It was published by Echo Publishing, who are an independent publisher. So it fitted into the indie prompt on the bingo board. Totally forgot to tell you what any of the others were. This is hot setting. Force of Nature is set in Australia. This is indie. Anyway, so like I said, this is a crime book, but it's not a mystery story. It's not a something has happened and we're trying to figure out what has happened in the past. It's working towards something going to happen, and it's about we follow three different women whose names are Grace, Zoe and Imogen, and we flip backwards and forwards between their perspectives, and we just follow them in their general kind of day-to-day life. But you start to see a little bit of how their lives intersect to begin with, but then also as you read the book and listen to the different perspectives, you start to realize that one of them maybe isn't quite as she appears and maybe isn't quite as sort of stable as you might expect her to be. You start to see that there is something else going on, something that is not great, to put it mildly. And yeah, you start to realize that there are some not fantastic things going on and some disturbing things happening, and then that leads to the eventual kind of crime that happens, which is an accident in actual fact. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was really well written. It's really well interwoven together, even though on the face of it, when you first start the book, it doesn't appear like any of these characters have anything in common. You start to see little ways that their lives intersect and little ways that their actions ripple off into other people's actions. And yeah, like I said, you start to see one of these characters who's not quite mentally stable, and how that kind of affects what she does and says, and then how that affects other things that happen throughout the books and the way each person interacts with each other, and yeah, all of those sorts of things. I gave this one a 6.71, which is also a 3.5 stars. So I say that that the other one was fine, and I'm saying I really enjoyed this one. I did really enjoy this one, but I didn't think that it was the most amazing book in the world. Honestly, I probably should bump it up to a 4, or I should bump Happiness for Beginners down to a 3, because I think that's what I'll do. I think Happiness for Beginners is actually a 3 and this is a 3.5, because I like this one more than Happiness for Beginners. Happiness for Beginners was fine, but this one was a little bit more intriguing, and I really liked the way the different webs were interwoven. But it wasn't my favourite thing ever, so I'm glad I read it, but I probably won't ever reread it, basically. But yeah, if this is something that you think sounds interesting, I would recommend. I did find it enjoyable, and like I said, it was 3.5 stars. The final book that I read in November wasn't, again, an Australian book. However, I did really enjoy it. And that is Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich. This is the first book in the Peter Grant series. I read this one probably about 3 or 4 years ago and really enjoyed it, but never continued with the series. I have the second book, which I'm planning to read in December sometime, and I wanted to reread this first one because I didn't remember really anything from it. This is a paranormal crime fiction, so I read quite a bit of crime this month. Apparently it was the mood I was in, but this is paranormal. So we follow Peter Grant. We are following his perspective. One night there is a crime that occurs in the centre of London. Peter is just kind of a beat cop, and he is approached by a ghost who is a witness to the crime, and he takes the statement, but it's a ghost. And then that information somehow travels to someone who is a very special branch of the Metropolitan Police, and it turns out that the paranormal is real. He becomes an apprentice wizard to this inspector who is a wizard but also a policeman, and he starts to try and solve the crime. But then there's also a feud between the god of the Thames and the goddess of the Thames, who are the kind of god and goddess are two different parts of the Thames, and he is part of figuring out how to fix that feud and how to kind of make a truce. So there's a lot going on in this book. It was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. It's very fast-paced, really well written. Like I said, really fun. I just thought it was clever and fun and funny and all of those things. I gave it, again, a 6.86, which is 3.5 stars. So again, not the best thing I've ever read, but definitely enjoyable. I'm definitely going to drop Happiness for Beginners to 3 because these two books are definitely 3.5 stars and much better than Happiness for Beginners. But yeah, really enjoyed this one. Thought it was fun and a quick read and a fun read, so I would recommend. But yeah, those are all the books that I read in the month of November. I think I've told you all of the books that I read for the different prompts on the bingo board. Let me know in the comments below if you participated in the Australian readathon. Did you enjoy yourself? Did you follow the bingo board, or did you just read some Australian authors? Let me know as well if you didn't but you think you might next time, or if you are interested in any of these Australian books that I've talked about. Let me know all of that in the comments below. That would be amazing. If you'd like to leave me a comment but you don't know what, then leave me something Australian. So leave me a kangaroo or a koala or a platypus or a Tassie devil, something that is an Australian animal, or anything Australian really. All of my social media details are listed in the description below, so if you'd like to go and follow me on any of those other platforms, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.